more from hand, either on a local level or regional level or national level. So I think we should really reconsider, and I know Woodward's argument, but of course it's been a long time since she wrote this, and there have been many other arguments actually to the contrary to this. So I think this argument really needs to be reconsidered. It was not IMF that destroyed Yugoslavia. And certainly, on the contrary, actually, it was not destroyed in a moment of the heaviest economic crisis. I mean, Yugoslavia collapsed at the moment when it started recovering economically, when Ante Markovic successfully stopped inflation. So the question is actually whether we could actually use this argument of economic crisis in any deterministic way, and I don't think we can.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Jovanovski. Would you like to respond?
Thanks. No, I wouldn't say we disagree so much, and actually I don't think you got me right. I didn't say the IMF caused the collapse of Yugoslavia. I said the IMF prepared the terrain for the collapse of Yugoslavia. What were those people in the 80s protesting against? They were protesting against precisely against the measures imposed by the IMF. This is more privatization, more austerity, privatization of industries where they got fired and so on, and they were protesting against that. And I wouldn't claim Milosevic was just a socialist. I mean, as Renata rightly said, he was a banker, among other things. During the 70s, he was the director of one of the biggest Belgrade banks. He was working in the States also as a banker, and what he did with the protests was to channel them in something called zbivanja naroda, or how was it called in anti-bureaucratska revolucija, but the protests, when the workers were protesting against the measures, were called by him happenings of the people. So they weren't anymore anti-structural protests, anti-government protests, but happenings of the people. So I'm not saying that it was the IMF, it is much more complex. And as I tried to show, but of course it may sound simplistic to explain the collapse of Yugoslavia, and it is really difficult to explain the collapse of Yugoslavia in 10 minutes, but I mean, Susan Woodward and other people, and you yourself as well, have written volumes about it. But I would say the collapse of Yugoslavia started already in the 70s. Some problems started already in the 50s, and they weren't resolved. As I mean, that the first dissident wasn't only Gilas, but it was Kidrić as well. Kidrić had the luck to die in 53, I think. And all those people at Bakarić, they were showing and they were warning what are the dangers of socialism. I mean, there is a great anecdote told by, I will be short, by Milan Kangarga, one of the Praxis school philosophers, who in his book Švercer vlastitih života, which is, I think, one of the best titles for all those people who were leftists before the 90s, and then they turned into neoliberals or nationalists after the 90s. He recalls an episode when Erich Fromm was coming to Yugoslavia in the 60s. So Erich Fromm came to Yugoslavia, Gajo Petrović, another member of the famous Praxis school, was his host, and they made an excursion to a Yugoslavian industry. And they came there, and the director of the industry was there, the president of the trade union, and a worker. And all the time Fromm was posing questions. Okay, can you please tell us where is the project of self-management today? I remind you, this is during the 60s. And all the time the director of the company was answering. And then at one point Erich Fromm asks, okay, but do the workers still read books? Do they still have additional education to find out about the new trends of self-management all around the world and blah, blah, blah? And again the director is answering. And Fromm went home because Gajo Petrović, and this is in the memoirs, you can read it, of Milan Kangarga, because Gajo Petrović, the Praxis guy, was all the time translating wrong. So the problem with the collapse of the economy, I mean, now we speak about the socialist economy, what was supposed to be the socialist economy was inherent to the socialist system. I'm not claiming the bad guys, IMF, Western forces, powers, and so on, came and imposed their measures, and then Yugoslavia collapsed and we had war and so on. I claim we had already problems inside Yugoslavia with self-management, with bureaucracy, with all the problems that are visible already, I mean, okay, not in the 50s, but from the 60s and the 70s. But what we have to take into consideration is the period of the 80s, worker strikes, worker struggles, which were anti-nationalist, but the result was nationalist. That's all I was saying.
Thank you, Srečko, and Inan, it's your turn now.
Okay. Anyway, Inan Ruma from Istanbul Bilgi University. I have questions for Slavisha and Srečko. For Slavisha is, well, your arguments sounded quite substantial and convincing, I would say, but I have to say also that I'm not convinced, because I will ask you to compare, for example, Richard Nixon's speech in ending the Bretton Woods Agreement. He was openly complaining about uncontrolled capital movements and the damage that it was given to the US economy. And then in 1998, Joseph Stiglitz, as the chief economist of the World Bank, complained about uncontrolled capital movements and indeed anticipated that in the near future we'll have a global crisis as a result of this uncontrolled capital movements. He wrote this in 1998. We had the crisis in 2008. And there was always this problem of uncontrolled capital movements and the so-called liberalization of capital after 1973, as you know. So, how come that we have regulation in the finances, and that's not the result, that's not the cause of the crisis? Shall I also tell the second question to Srečko and
Maybe we take more questions.
Well, maybe that's a good idea, because we have
then the question to Srečko is, I think in the case of European Parliament elections and this extreme right and left in European political scene, what will be decisive is, it seems, first, European capital's position. If they choose once again to support rather the right in leading the extreme forms, rather than the democratic left, as they did in the framework of 1929 economic crisis, we know the result. And we actually know that capital is not always as wise as we socialists think. So I think that will be the decisive point. I wonder actually what you all think about European capital's position on extreme right and democratic left in European Parliament elections. And secondly, the second point will be obviously the resistance capacity of the left, both intellectually and also physically. This is something we discuss also in the Turkish case, both in terms of intellectual capacity and physical capacity, because we are also physically exhausted. The amount of tear gas I had can be compared to a First World War soldier, I would say, but it was not at once, it was divided, so I didn't die. But how we can produce resistance if the authoritarian conservative behavior increases? That will be, I think, the question that will be decisive in the ongoing of the affairs. I wonder what you think. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So the capital controls and stuff. So this Bretton Woods agreement was about fixed exchange rates, right? When you have fixed exchange rates, that's what we had the world from 1945 till 71, 73. You need capital controls, or you cannot have fixed exchange rates, independent monetary policy, and free capital flows at the same time. Once you get rid of fixed exchange rates, when they become flexible, which they are right now, most of them, and they've been since 1973, then you don't need capital controls. Capital can flow freely. The exchange rate adjusts. I mean, I can't go too much into this, but basically these capital controls are anachronistic. We don't need them anymore. As for Stiglitz's comment on 98, a few countries in Southeast Asia that had a crisis at the time, late 97 and then 98, they had fixed exchange rates, and they liberalized capital flows. So when you have fixed exchange rates and free flows, you will get into trouble. That's what happened to them. to most of them. And that's when he made his comment. But we don't have them. You know, most economies, they don't have them anymore. Most economies now have flexible exchange rates. So this liberalization it's really not relevant anymore. So you can freely have that, and you do not get into this kind of, you don't get into exchange rate trouble. So that part is not really. Speaking of Stiglitz and his predictions, his relevant prediction was written in 2003. He writes an article with Peter Orszag, who was then the director of the budget office of the United States, claiming that two government agencies that I mentioned in my talk, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, that buy all the mortgage-backed securities, that they are not the problem of the system, that they are actually quite safe. They estimated risk, as Renata pointed out, that we use mathematical formulas and they're questionable. They estimated risk, they said, no, this system is super safe. That's what Stiglitz did. Conveniently, they took it down from the internet since then. It's a terrible, terrible mistake. But to me, you know, it's not about Stiglitz. To me, it shows us, it points to the bigger problem, which is this pretense of knowledge. We think we know how the economy will work. And then we regulate it, having that knowledge in mind. If it turns out we are wrong, everything goes to hell. And so, to just comment on some of the questions that co-panelists pointed out. Yes, so as Renato pointed out, that's a very good point, value at risk, and we put too much faith into that. But to me, the difference is who does it? If a private bank uses that formula, and the formula turns out to be wrong, all right, they go down, they go bankrupt. The problem now with value at risk was not only intellectual, but the states, the Basel regulation used that same formula. It was a formula officially adopted. Then they allowed large banks, instructed large banks to use that formula. They said, all right, we estimate risk according to the value at risk formula, and the banks are allowed, some of them are allowed to estimate their own risk according to this prescribed criteria. So once again, we are talking about regulation. Once again, we are talking about the state uniformizing behavior. And to me, that is the problem. You know, in the end, the problem of capitalism today is that we, and as Professor Mitchell made comments on what kind of system is that we have now, I think it is ultimately the problem is the reliance of cognitive elites. Someone there says we know what's going on and we are gonna tell you all how to do it. And if they make a mistake, they may be the smartest in the world, but everyone makes mistakes. If they make a mistake, everything goes down. Let me also comment on a few. I'm going to misuse this microphone now. Ask you to do few things that my panelists asked. So, I mean, I like Srećko Horvat as well, but yeah, we had a very nice conversation with dinner.
Everybody likes Srećko.
But I think
I like to disagree as well.
Well, it's always, you know, with but.
But you're ugly, stupid.
That's what we like. No, kidding. No, really. True, but when these comments about floods, it very much reminds me of the financial crisis going. So we don't really see the mechanism. How in the world does the free market? How is the free market built for floods? I just didn't understand that. First of all, I don't even know what companies were privatized in Serbia. What water companies are privatized? Second, what do water companies have to do with that at all? Flood was about a lot of water coming. And if the state has any role in society and economies to provide public goods, the first public good is infrastructure around rivers, the levees. There was the same problem in Hurricane Katrina and now in the Balkan floods. The state was the one that was supposed to build levees. It failed spectacularly. They didn't build levees.
But through public companies. Vodoprivreda.
Public companies, but
the public companies don't exist anymore, in most of the cases.
Local companies, it was about local companies at the local level, for example, in Paraćin, in Šapcu.
Sremska Mitrovica, na primjer, je privatizirana, 2000 ljudi izgubilo posao.
All the same, it's a public good, it's a typical public good, build levees. Same with
That's what I'm claiming.
But it is a state failure. So you're saying
But why is it a state failure? Exactly because of the ideology of free market. We don't need goods. We don't need public goods anymore.
No, nobody says that. It's because the state is now doing everything: health, education, banking, telecommunications, all private goods that should be left to the market for the most part. That's what the state is doing, but it's not doing what its job. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. So that's
It seems you both agree.
we do. We did agree when he said the Balkans should try free market. I like that part. That was a provocation.
All right.
Okay, yeah, I should probably stop here.
Because thank
time
you,
for more questions.
Slasher. I mean, excellent point, but we don't have too much time, so
Yes,
just let me know when do we stop, all right? And now it's.
The coffee is outside, so if anyone wants a coffee, maybe you can get inside and the coffee inside and continue discussion if you want.
Okay, anyway, I will try to answer this question first and then I will come back to this because I thought I explained it, but obviously not. And I like you as well, and I like you, and we all like each other, but and it's great. The question, where will the capital turn? I think beside, for me, Wolf of Wall Street is really a problematic, ideologically problematic film because, you know, there you have the argument which we had in circulation after the financial crisis of 2007-2008. A few bad apples. Leonardo DiCaprio is one of the bad apples who was greedy, wanted to fuck, have drugs and so on, and more money to have more drugs, more chicks and so on, you know. A better movie, and here I come to your answer, is Kostas Gavras' last movie called Capital, where you have a director of one of the most important investment banks in Europe. The bank is not named during the movie, but it's a realistic scenario. And this is a guy who is the clear opposite of Leonardo DiCaprio from Wolf of Wall Street. This is a guy who is completely rational, completely normal, who, okay, has an affair with a beautiful model and she gives him some drugs and so on, but then he returns again back and his only goal is more accumulation of capital. Why? Just to accumulate more. Not accumulation to have drugs and so on, but to have more accumulation. And I think those guys are the real dangerous guys. If I may return back to what Renata said about the colonel from Iraq, who answered, I'm not feared about the guys who have anxiety. I am terrified by the guys who don't have it, where you can see in the eyes that they enjoy killing. And it reminded me of a famous episode from German film history, the famous relationship between Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski. If you watch it's a great documentary movie, Mein liebster Feind, like us here, my dearest enemy, you know, they all like each other but they are enemies. In the movie you have several scenes where you can see Klaus Kinski who is completely crazy. When they shot Fitzgeraldo, you know, he tried to shoot someone on the set, he was arguing all the time with all the people, threatening to kill Herzog and so on. And then you have some Indians, it was in Latin America, I think Peru or wherever they shot the film, they came to Herzog and they said, you know, we were terrified all the time, but we didn't fear Kinski, we were terrified because of you. Because you were the one who was calm all the time. And I think this is precisely the problem. Herzog was the guy who was crazy. He was a guy who wanted a huge ship in the film. He was a guy who had these crazy ideas. And I think the same goes for the guy from, and here I will come to the question about capital, the same goes from the guy from the Costa Gavras movie. The guy, Leonardo DiCaprio, he's actually a normal guy. Greed is normal today. Or as the guy from Oliver Stone's movie said from Wall Street, greed is good. In the next movie he said greed is legal. That's the situation today. But the real problem and the real things which are not normal are guys like, I mean, I like Herzog, of course, I'm not claiming he should be sent to some psychiatric institution, but those guys are not normal. I mean, to be calm all the time is not normal. It's not lunatic to burn some cars in Paris in 2005 because you're an immigrant in the banlieue. It's crazy not to do it because the situation is like that. It's not crazy to have protests in Istanbul or in Greece or in Latin America or during the Arab Spring. It's crazy to keep calm. So what very capital turn, there is a great scene in this movie by Costa Gavras where these investment bankers come to a dinner to his family, and his mother complains, "Oh son, but you are never at home, we never see you, you always invest and travel all around the world," and so on. And then his uncle, who is old 68 leftist, tells him, "But nephew, you are exploiting people, you're giving these loans to Greece, you are destroying the Greek working class, the people, and so on." And you know what this guy says? "Yeah, uncle, but we succeeded in the thing which you didn't succeed. We have succeeded to build the real international, and that's the international of capital." And I think capital doesn't have borders. Of course, historical examples show in the most of the cases it will turn to neoconservatives, to right-wings, but precisely Russia, which was mentioned all the time here during the recent panels, is the best example that it doesn't have borders. First example, after the last Greek elections, the first people who turned to Alexis Tsipras, that was a few years ago, when they were smart, unlike Merkel and the people from European Union, they saw what might be coming. And what might be coming is Syriza in power. So they came to Tsipras and they offered, the Russians offered a military base in Greece, and China offered also capital. So they are not crazy. Second example is the presence of Russia in these countries. And I think here is Putin is a genius of our times. I'm not sure if you are aware that last year he was in Kaliningrad, which was called Königsberg, of course, and this is of course the place where Kant was all the time. Kant was a guy who didn't like moving and so on. I am finishing with this. And he was at the university.
He was correcting the time, Kant, because he was very
yeah. But anyway, I'm not. I'm not Kant. And he was at the university and he was speaking very positively about Kant, saying we should translate Kant into Russian. And you know what he said then? The paper about eternal peace is something which is of most importance for Europe today. That was last year. So, is he cynical or is he right? I think he is right because he understands eternal peace as the eternal peace of capital. And you have it in the Balkans. 56% of Gazprom, 56% of the previous national oil company in Serbia is owned by Gazprom. The last news a few weeks ago is that Rosneft, the other big oil company from Russia, is trying to buy INA, the national company from Croatia, previously owned by, or not still owned by the Hungarians, and Petrol from Slovenia. The guy, it's not a guy, it's capitalism at its worst, whom I mentioned, and who is trying to buy Mercator in Slovenia, was offered, and he took it, a loan of 600 million euros, not by a European bank, but by Sberbank, by the Russians. So the Russians are now helping a Croatian monopolist to buy. So what I'm claiming is that, you know, this is false also in the Ukrainian crisis, I would say. On the one hand, you know, you have this false choice. Either you will choose European Union or you will choose Russia. The capital is already there. I mean, the solution is what Trotsky said 75 years ago. The only solution is an independent, workers, peasants, Ukraine. I know this is completely utopian, that you don't have these forces in Ukraine, but what I say, even if they turn to the European Union, what you will have there is the same as in the Balkans. You will have Russian capital. Or you will have Arab capital like in Serbia. So what is to be done for the left? And by this I'm concluding, because there are many more speakers and probably also questions, is not just to dismiss all this problematic. You know, people today, they like to accuse Syriza and Tsipras of being social democrats. And especially after Tsipras, just a few days after this big success at the European elections, held a big talk in front of the biggest Greek industrialists, you know, and now everyone from the radical left is adoring to hate Tsipras and claiming this was a liberal, social democratic turn and so on, third way, whatever. But I think, you know, we have to get rid of the illusion that capital won't be present in a country even if a leftist power takes over the government. What is to be done? Just in short, because that's the most difficult question, it's on the one hand to get rid of the illusion that if you form a political party, you will inevitably get corrupted. The second is to get rid of the illusion that only occupations at the streets can change the situation. Look to the Arab Spring. Look to what happened to the Occupy Wall Street, look at all those horizontal democratic movements. What you have is Muslim Brotherhood, then the army, what you have again in US is Obama and so on. What we had in Croatia after all these protests is again a social democratic government which is, when it comes to economy, radical as the previous conservative government. And the third, I would say what is needed is something what happened in Bosnia at the beginning of this year. This is the plenums, this is a way further from the mere occupations or protests of the streets. This is solidarity among the people and something which we had in Yugoslavia during self-management. Of course, it failed. But I would say only by combining these three things, the left can succeed. And I see it's happening in Europe. Of course, there is a far way in front of us, but Podemos, the party I mentioned, which got 8% at the elections, most of the people are from the Indignados. Iniciativa za demokratski socializam from Slovenia, they are connected with the people from Maribor, Slovenia, who were doing the occupations. In Greece, it's the same. Some of the representatives who now sit in the European Parliament in front of Syriza are one of the biggest activists. For example, the guy, of 90 years old guy who took off the swastika in the 40s from the Acropolis, or the guys who were also present at Syntagma Square. So I think we need this dialectics between political parties, protest movements, and horizontal democracy. I think this is the only solution for the left in the future.
All right, thank you. So let's go. Gunnar, can you keep your thoughts for a second, because Professor Salesal wanted to intervene slightly?
Just a short comment. When you were mentioning VAR, value at risk, there's an interesting, a usual saying in capitalism is that there is no free lunch. Now, how this program became adopted by corporations and governments and so on was through a free lunch offered by the bank which first invented it. One of the big American banks, first, I think it was Morgan Stanley or something like this, figured out this program, and they were thinking to sell it, to start selling this value at risk. And then they decided, no, to universalize something, we have to give it for free. So they gave it to other banks for free, and in this way, in some way, through this free lunch, we created, a kind of real problem with the program. Now, about the floods, I was just having, kind of a reminiscence that in finance we are speaking also about floods of toxic assets. It's kind of a flooding everywhere, unfortunately, in different ways. And about privatization of waters and so on, it reminded me that in the UK, a total catastrophe emerged when they privatized a railway station and no one was taking care for the rails, so we have, similar problems there. But there is an optimistic conclusion to our debates. Is just this morning I was reading American news that a big success in the workers' movement happened in Seattle just these days, where workers working in the fast food chains decided to demand $15 per hour as the minimal wage, which is unbelievable. It's double what is the minimal wage in New York, where it's $7.25, and they succeeded. And although everyone, the economists were saying this will kill the jobs and so on, okay, people still like to eat, obviously, but somehow they succeeded with the arguments that the workers who were so underpaid were also so unproductive.